So hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. It's so nice to have you with us again today. We come to you like this every 2 weeks, fortnightly, to kind of plumb deeply into some major issue related to this extraordinary, unprecedented time that we're all living in. It's amazing kind of thing that we're all experiencing here. You could make the case, perhaps, that it's, unequaled in all of recorded human history, at least. And so it makes some sense to try to figure out and try to answer the big questions, because we're in a space where we've never been before. And so we get together like this, coming to you from the Arlington Institute in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, although today I'm in the Wasatch Mountains of Utah, and kind of taking some time to work on a book. But we come to you with four of us, to a quartet, if you will, trying to make some sense and, explore what this is all about. And so, Kingsley Dennis, how are you, my friend, from the UK?
Very well, thank you, John. Hello, Greg, Penny, and everyone watching. I'm coming to you from an undisclosed location in the UK.
Right, from your secret bunker. Hi, Penny Kelly. Hello.
Hi there. Hi, Greg. Hi, Kingsley. And hi, John. Long time no talk. So
Yeah, right.
I'm
sure you're buried by snow or something up there.
Oh no. Oh no, we're having the same kind of weather you're having out there in the Wasatch. Rain and cloudy, and 41 is our high. So.
Yeah, good. Gregg Braden, thank you. Thanks for being with us again.
John, it's good to see you, Kingsley and Penny, always. I look forward to this I'm amazed at how fast the 2 weeks pass between one of these quartets and the other. I am in our studio here in Santa Fe, and Penny, we're getting the snow. Oh. Excuse me. We've had 2 big snowstorms this last week at night, and then during the day it's nice and sunny. So that's the way to do it.
Yeah, your storms are coming in over the west, and at Tahoe and so on, there are places where they're getting 4 feet in 4 hours or something. It's just crazy what's going on up there.
Yeah, Colorado, my friends up at Gaia, the Gaia Studios, they had 1.5 feet of snow in just a few hours up there in Boulder, Colorado this last week. So
that's good. Good for skiing.
Yep.
So thank you all. It's nice to have you with us. So we're at our topic for today, and I'd like to set this up by talking about Don Rumsfeld. Don Rumsfeld is a well-known American in the higher levels of our government who used to be the Secretary of Defense. He used to be a friend of mine. We used to have lunch every once in a while. And Don was kind of famous for 2 different things. One of them was that he stood up at a press conference once and said, well, we're missing $2.3 trillion in the defense in the assessment and audit. And then, of course, the next day was 9/11 and everything blew up and they didn't have to deal with it. So that was one of the things that he had to. But the other thing that he was kind of famous for was standing up again at a press conference and kind of schooling the press corps and saying, well, there are things that you know that you don't know, and there are things that you don't know that you know, and then there are things that you don't know that you don't know, and that's kind of what you've got to keep in mind as you think about whatever the subject at hand was. Well, there's a lot of truth to that. A lot of people made a lot of fun about that, but if you're trying to make some sense out of a situation for which there is no precedent, then you've got to constantly keep in mind, whether it's explicitly or it's in the back burner, just sitting there all the time. You got to sit there all the time and you say, what do I really know, or what don't I know? And am I getting just swept downstream by the ideas and the presumptions of the mainline media and other kinds of things? And that's particularly the kind of trenchant and important here in the face of a wave of change into a space that's going into a space for which we have no precedent. And so it's really easy, and in fact, it's the common way that people do. It's really easy to drag out some kind of a response based upon the past. We all make sense out of things. Sense making is all about pattern recognition. And what that means, if you think about it a little bit, means that you are locked into trying to understand everything that you're looking at as a byproduct of what you've already experienced. Would you have some model or some pieces or something that gives you a kind of a framework, a logical, intellectual framework from which to make sense out of it? And so every new thing that comes into your life, you initially jump to the conclusion, as an attempt to make sense out of it, you jump to the conclusion that it is a variant of something that you already know something about. Otherwise, you're looking at a blank slate. You're looking at a black screen almost, because you've got no framework from which to make sense out of what you're looking at. And for a lot of people, that turns into a blank stare, glazed eyes, or whatever the situation is, because they don't grok, they don't have any mechanism for making sense out of or going forward into a situation to which they have no experience and they don't know. And that makes them very susceptible to being told what's happening by the narrative, by the powers that be, which of course is what's happening. That's what we can't do, or what we need not do as we go forward here, those of us who are trying to make sense out of this new human in this new world. Our question today is, what don't we know that we need to know in the face of all of this? Because we're going from an old world to a new world. And by definition, that is, the new world is really different than the old world, which we all have lived and been a part of. And therefore, what you've got to be doing is looking for these new kind of fragments in these ideas. Essentially, what don't I know that I don't know that I don't know? I mean, you're really kind of feeling your way into this space, very open in terms of your aperture, trying to say, how do I get from here to what in the world is going on?
John, that's a tricky question. I think it's trickier than it sounds on paper. When I first look at that, what don't I know that I ought to know? My first response was myself. Because as you rightly say, the more we feel a sense of not knowing, the more that we outsource that responsibility, and we go on like a scavenger hunt, trying to gather as much data and information as possible, because we don't want to be uncertain. And of course, and I think that's part of what's happening, is that's feeding into a feedback loop, making us more uncertain, because we're getting more data and we can't place it on anything, or we keep it kind of on shelves. And also, I think that I think we're also being taken advantage of, because of that kind of need for information and data and certitude. There's a lot of clickbait out there. There's a lot of corrupt alternative media out there, which may be corrupt deliberately or corrupt because they just want to make money on putting out videos, and so everyone's kind of taking advantage of this need, this hunger. And also, when I looked at the question, I thought, well, for me, there's like two questions in there. One is, what would be important to know? And two, can it help me? So I think there's a degree of, let's say, I call them curious questions. Like, I would like to know, yes, on a curious question, are there any major incoming solar cosmic events? So for example, I heard recently about the meteorite Apophis, I think it's called Apophis, based on the Egyptian god. And this this asteroid is coming from nearby flights. And a few years ago, some American scientists have said, astrophysicists said that to their calculations, there's a 2.7% chance of a Earth collision. Now, no one's mentioning that. That would be good to know, because the time of the nearest flyby or potential collision is 2029. And I think the popular U.S. Celebrity physicist Grass is his name. He said that there could be a potential collision. Okay. Now, these things, if they were going to hit, if there would be a collision, would we be told about it? Because imagine the panic of that if there's a 2.7% chance. Perhaps we wouldn't be told about it. But the question is, if we were told about it, would it help us? I would like to know what is really going on at CERN, despite what we've been told. And many people out there are saying, but I know what's going on. They're opening portals to other dimensions, etc. The thing is, all these answers can't really benefit us because we have to have some degree of experiential knowledge, Otherwise, we can't really take it on 100%. Other questions which I think people may ask is, how deeply embedded is the dark technologies, the black technologies? How deeply embedded is AI running the world and making the decisions? And again, that would be useful to know in a sense that we know that when events are manipulated or calculated, there is such a complexity which is beyond the human mind. Okay. Now, that would help us to kind of know more about how the gameplay is being strategized. But the question is, how can it help us? So I think there's important questions, but for me, these important questions only come home if I can have some degree of kind of experiential knowledge of those questions. Otherwise, I can't verify any answer out there. So I think the real questions then, that what don't we know that we ought to know, comes down, I think, to the human being. What are the real power and capacity inherent in the human being that those people or those forces out there on the world stage are really afraid of? Because the one thing that they're not going to tell you that we ought to know is the great capacity, strength, and empowerment of the human being, and the capacity of the human being to derail all those plans external to us. So, and I think they know that. And that's what's being hidden from us, and also energetically blocked from us by all these technologies and events of energetic de-empowering.
This morning, I got invited to breakfast by my 9-year-old grandson. So I decided I was going to do a little survey. And so I asked my son, and I asked my son actually first, what don't we know that's really important that we ought to know? And before he could even open his mouth, my 9-year-old grandson said, life. The second thing that came up, this was my son's answer, it was how to work. And so then we got into a whole discussion about work and discipline. And are you willing to work? Are you willing to do what you need to do to be here in life? So then that sparked a whole train of thought. The whole thing about discipline, when you talk about discipline, most people are going to think about punishment, being disciplined in some way. But the real meaning of discipline is to follow your heart, to be a disciple to yourself. Who are you? What do you love? What do you need? What do you want to see? What brings you joy? That's the disciple of you that then says, okay, let me go after that. Let me create that. And we don't know that we actually can give ourselves permission to do that. This was my first answer, was consciousness. People do not realize that they don't have consciousness, They are consciousness. How does it work? Why does it work that way? There's so much about consciousness that is, I'm going to say, distorted deliberately. And if I can pick up on Kingsley's thought about our capacity, why don't they, whoever they is, want us to know what our capacities are? Because we can and probably will distort, disrupt, disturb their plan. Another thing that I think we ought to know that's really, really important is the nature of reality. So the nature of reality, well, first of all, reality is an expression of consciousness, period. It's an expression that comes from people. We're making this reality what it is. And when we respond to somebody, the kind of response is going to determine the kind of action or interaction that is. Stomp on somebody and they're going to stomp back. So the nature of reality is really a form of consciousness. There are other reality systems. They are, we just haven't had the experience of those. And why? Because, if I borrow this baby's thought, we don't sit down and let ourselves know that, like the Quakers do, 20 minutes a day just to tune in. What's happening in me? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Where am I going? Is this where I want to be going? All of that is really important because we are consciousness and we shape the reality around us, because the nature of reality is consciousness. It's all energy, and consciousness and energy are the same thing. Consciousness is the feeling aspect of energy, and energy is the motion of consciousness. So if you think about, about consciousness, you will have to come to grips with frequency. And frequencies are waves of consciousness. And those frequencies come in all sizes, all amplitudes, all depths, all speeds, we'll say. And frequency equals the kind of consciousness you have. So if you're at one frequency, you can have the kind of consciousness or perception that frequency allows. And if you're at a different frequency, you're going to have a different kind of perception and a different kind of feeling response.
Kingsley, I love your statement. You have to know when to act and when not to act. I think that is reflected in the song. You got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. And we can only do that if we understand ourselves. So I think we're all thinking along the same lines here. John, when I got the question, the word ought threw me a little bit, because what do we need to know? What is it useful to know? What should we know? And ought it's not a word that I use a lot. So I came from this from a little bit of there's a beautiful place where science and spirituality come together in a way that's very practical in our lives. So I kind of approached it from this perspective. We respond to the world based upon the way we've been taught to think about ourselves. And that's what we're all saying here. We need to know who we are so we know what our capacity is to respond and what our options are. So the things that the unknowns, I think, that would help us with that are the deep mysteries of who we are. And I just listed a couple. I'm just going to go through three of them really quick here. I think we ought to know what the origin of our universe is, and not into the nth degree, but to the understanding as to whether or not it is a natural, what we call a natural origin, or is it an engineered origin? Because that speaks to the nature of the reality that we're living in. Following that, the origin of human life. Are we the product of a natural process, or, as the evidence suggests, are we the product of an engineered process? And if so, what capacities has the engineering allowed that we're only beginning to understand? What are we wired for? And how can we awaken that potential to embrace in a healthy way the changes that we're seeing in the world today? The third one, I think, is one we've talked about in here a lot, is whether or not we're in a simulated reality. Is this a simulation? Is this a virtual reality? That ties into the origin of the universe. But if we are in a simulation, I doubt that it's recreational. My sense is that we're here to solve a problem. And if we were to understand on a deeper level what that problem is, that would inform everything else we do, how we respond to health and healing and to the world and war and all of those things. So those are the things I think that we ought to know. But I think there is a key that will help us with all of this. We are just, we're recording this just after the holiday Easter weekend. Many people celebrate what's called Resurrection Weekend. And part of that is a mystery that is still a mystery today that we call the Shroud of Turin. But the bottom line, there were two studies, one in 1978 done by 40 researchers. They were given unprecedented access to the shroud 24/7 for a full week. And there was a second study that was done in 1988. 1988 was done by one man. He was poorly funded. He had poor equipment. And his study showed that the shroud was a hoax. That's the story that made it around the world. The 1978 study, 10 years earlier, investigated 5 scientific areas of study. And the bottom line from that study is there's nothing in the shroud that prevents it from being the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. There is a physical shroud, and Los Alamos National Labs, the United States Air Force, Colorado State University were all involved in the 1978 study. And the dating, whether or not there was blood on the shroud, the pollen grains, the image formation, there's nothing that has been found to date that prevents the shroud from being the burial shroud of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, whether it was Jesus or not, here's the fact. Something happened to a man, one of us, inside that shroud that left a mystery that we cannot solve today. The only way to solve that mystery is we've got to think differently about ourselves and our relationship to reality. One of the studies is showing that when humans heal, our body, the cells of our body actually embrace gamma radiation, high bursts of gamma radiation for brief periods of time to facilitate our healing. So quick, and most people don't even think about it, they don't measure it. One of the things that the Shroud studies found was that it appears that the body had undergone such trauma that it radiated high amounts of gamma radiation, and that is partially responsible for the image on the shroud.
What you also don't know is you don't know about the secret programs that have been going on. We operate in a space that is truncated, dramatically truncated, frankly, in some cases. If you take into consideration the fact that the kinds of things like AI that's showing up now has probably been under the table for 50 years, and that it's been very well developed in some areas, that spooky places where none of us know anything about. You need to understand that when they start talking about AI, you ought to say, wait a second, what have they been doing? What is this? And where did it come from? Because it didn't just show up because some guys in Stanford suddenly got an idea and decided to pursue this. These things, they're all layered in terms of how they kind of emerge and come out from behind the kind of secret space. Penny in the past has talked about Popular Mechanics magazine back in the 50s, did you say, or the 60s? I forget, where they had an article about some asteroid that was going to hit the Earth, and then it disappeared, and nobody ever talks about it. You got to say to yourself, "Wait a second, what's happening there?" Because if you didn't ask those questions, you'd be blind to the potential possibilities. And another thing that we've kind of talked about, or certainly I've talked about in the past, is what is it that they know that is driving this whole thing that's not in our minds. This is really like investigation of a crime or some major thing where we're trying to look for all of the little bits and the pieces that come together in a different kind of way that it's not obvious at first, because there's always direction, and there's always kind of planning and purpose behind these things. Even if we don't understand them, then the question is, who's the benefit? How does because somewhere it's being driven. There's a deterministic kind of element to the 3D reality we live in.
Between the four of us, my mind is kind of blown. So, yeah. I have to say something about what Gregg said, the Shroud of Turin being like a key. I think it's one of the keys. And I have always seen that Shroud of Turin as not the big mystery that everybody says it is, because when you, let me say it this way, I became personally interested in the process of leaving here after Kundalini. In the very beginning of Kundalini, one of the big messages I got was demonstrating, you people need to begin demonstrating how to leave here. And I was like, what? You mean dying? What are you talking about? And so there was this ongoing struggle. And then it became clear, one of the messages, that we could take our body with us. And I thought, that's horsepucky. Well, then years later, I discovered the rainbow body process in the Far East. And there are all kinds of people, I think the hundreds of thousands of people who have left using that technique. And I often think that the Shroud of Turin was a reminder to the people in the West that don't let them tell you that this is impossible.
Yeah, Penny, I thank you for that. I used to lead groups into Tibet when the borders were open. And we spent a lot of time, 12 monasteries and 2 nunneries over 26 days.
Wow.
We got to know the monks and the nuns and the abbots really well. And the rainbow body is something that they were happy to talk with us about and share with us. And it was during the same time I was studying the Shroud. They may be related processes. I don't think they're the same process, and for this reason. The physicists at Los Alamos Labs said the only way to explain what happened when they look at the cloth is that the body had to actually pass through the cloth. And the body passed through the cloth intact with the full proportions. And in the rainbow body, that is what's changing. The body is actually changing in the physical realm. If we are, and we don't have the physical proof for this, if we're to believe the lore around the resurrection, then the man inside the shroud came back into this world and then left again. This speaks, I think, strongly to a simulation theory of how we are able to move in and out of the simulation intact. We don't have to leave the body behind. And I think that's the whole idea of turning the body, the emotions, the power of human emotions to transmit the chemistry of the body into a higher form of energy at will, on demand. Yeah, well, that's what I mean. I think we may have a physical, tangible key that can be solved scientifically in the shroud that would open the door to the answers to all the things the origin of the universe. Where do people come from? You know, what is the origin of life in general? What is our purpose here? How can we participate? To what degree can we contribute to a better world? All of that comes back to the way we think about ourselves.
For me, I think the way to summarize that is what we ought to know is how damn important we are, because this reality constructs exist for life. Life is integral to this reality construct, and humanity is an important part of that. We are important. We're funny. We're compassionate. We're loving. We're caring. We're creative, and we're everything that the other side are trying to put down. So another thing that we ought to know is, why are they so scared of us? And let us remember that the advantages and the powers on our side, and you know, the other side is operative because we have something that they don't have.
That's right.
And that is the spark of humanity.
Right now, we're out of time. And so I thank you all for the delightful conversation. It's always fun to work through all of this. For those of our viewers who are with us for the first time, let me remind you that we're coming to you from the Arlington Institute, which is a little think tank that I started over 35 years ago. We're located in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, just 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore. And this is one of, Quartet is only one of a whole bunch of different kind of things we do, and you can find out about it all at arlingtoninstitute.org. And so I'd encourage you to be there and look it up. Penny Kelly's going to be at our transition talks here in May. And we've been talking about what that's going to be. That's going to be a great time. Gregg will be with us in December, and we've got, you know, Dave Martin's going to be here in this coming weekend in a couple of days. And so it's we've got a great lineup, and that's Transition Talks, and you can find that at arlingtoninstitute.org. Well, thank you so much for all of you. Thank you all, the three of you, for the insightful kind of assessments of all of this, and thank you all who are watching. We appreciate it very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again in 2 more weeks. Take care.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Everybody.
Cheers
Thank
now.
you.